In this film comparison, I will compare and contrast two westerns, A Fistful of Dollars by Sergio Leone and The Power of the Dog by Jane Campion. I will specifically be looking at how both movies portray masculinity. I chose this film genre for its larger-than-life macho stars such as John Wayne or Clint Eastwood, who stars in the Dollars trilogy. I feel as though these two films are the best to contrast due to the time gap in filming the movies and when they were set, the lead performances, and the way both movies handle its female characters. Filmed in 1964 and directed by Sergio Leone, we follow Clint Eastwood as the man with no name. While the exact year of A Fistful of Dollars is unclear, we can assume it's past 1873. Filmed in Spain and set in Mexico, we're transported to the frontier, still mostly uncrowded by the masses. At this point, the West was strong. While perhaps not as violent as this sort of movie tends to suggest, there still were gunfights, lawlessness, and brutal gangs. In his first scene, Eastwood, as I will refer to him, is given a musical cue signifying his importance. This is again displayed when Eastwood makes eye contact with the henchman Chico. Eastwood looks on sternly this whole time, conflicting the norm for westerns up to this point. He stands tall, calmly drinking water, cool as can be. When the character of Marisol comes onto the screen, the music softens, incorporating a higher-pitched flute. Marisol is later revealed to be the kidnapped wife and mother of the man and young child shown in this scene. Some of the plot is dedicated to trying to liberate Marisol from the clutches of the Rojos, specifically the main antagonist Ramon. Marisol isn't really treated as a character in this film. She says very little, gets hit in the face by Eastwood, and is saved. Her only purpose in the film is to be important to the plot. Contrast this with Rose, played by Kirsten Dunst in The Power of the Dog, who takes a more active but similarly subdued part, being the central character for only half of the film. She's tormented by the bully Phil and eventually becomes an alcoholic. The true macho energy of Eastwood is shown to us a scene later when he enters town and is harassed by 4 gang members. After the gang members torment the mule, Eastwood makes acquaintances with a few characters around town.
Hello?
After doing so, he ominously tells the undertaker to prepare 3 coffins. Eastwood walks up to the men very friendly, gentlemanly almost, but there's an air of authority in his voice. He asks, more so states that the men will apologize to the mule, and when they laugh, he unveils his gun, his power over the situation.
I don't think it's nice, you laughing. You see, my mule don't like people laughing. It's the crazy idea you're laughing at him. Now, if you apologize like I know you're going to, I might convince him that you really didn't mean it.
Eastwood delivers swift retribution. And when he is through, he twirls his gun like a Western hero. John Baxter enters the scene, and instead of being fearful of this possible threat, Eastwood takes his gun out again and is ready to shoot him in the face until Baxter takes out his badge. Eastwood disregards this authority and delivers a quip.
The sheriff, you better get these men underground.
Eastwood is the classic definition of masculinity, a big, imposing man who doesn't take crap from anyone and deals justice as he sees fit. Throughout the film, there is constant air of Catholicism to him. He appears out of the smoke, a lone ranger. On the other side of masculinity in westerns is the tyrannical Phil Burbank, as played by Benedict Cumberbatch. Set in 1925 on a rural ranch in Montana, the West is effectively dead at this point. Power lines stretch through much of the landscape, and cars are becoming more commonplace and more useful as technology advances. Phil and his brother George are ranchers, although George is much more of a city person, which is shown through the dignified way he dresses. While in town during a cattle drive, Rose catches George's interest and the two get married within a few months. Not much to Phil's liking.
We were married Sunday.
From his very first scene, confidently walking across the lawn like he owns it, which he does, Phil captures the same larger-than-lifeness as Eastwood, but in a much more aggressive way.
Quietening, we're eating. Shut that down or I will!
He's a man's man. He doesn't ask, he tells. He drinks and he does all the heavy lifting. He castrates bulls and he holds power over everyone in the film. It's even signified in the way his boots hold such a weight.
And then Phil's
Boots was something very early on that Jane really wanted to focus on because it embodies his masculinity, his sort of aggression, his dominance, really. The production sound that Richard captured was actually very good, especially in Phil's boots in the house. They had a great resonance. And then we went about building some extra weight into the boots and some really identifiable sound for the spurs.
No one dares question him. He, much like Eastwood, demands the audience's attention and respect. He's the force which the entire narrative is driven. But unlike Eastwood, there's a vulnerability to Phil. Even though he commands 95% of the scenes he's in, there's a sadness under his anger. It is revealed to us several times throughout the film that Phil is actually a deeply repressed gay man, using his manliness to cover it up. This is shown to us after Rose's son Peter catches Phil bathing, and Phil gives chase. Phil then becomes much closer with Peter, losing much of his cruelty. Rose is shaken by this change in Phil and believes that it's another tactic to mess with her. When Rose gives away the pelts that Phil had in collection in an act of defiance, Phil loses it. He starts screaming like a child throwing a tantrum and even starts crying. Peter at this point was conspiring to kill Phil for the emotional abuse that he was putting his mother through. He manipulates Phil by telling him that he saved a hide to finish the rope they had been making. Phil's eyes, full of tears, jaw quivering. He tells him, "That's damn kind of you, Pete," and places his hand on the back of his head, leans in, and almost kisses him, but he stops. He regains this image that he is supposed to be, and takes the nurturing leader role once more. Peter at this point ceases being the Nancy boy, as Phil so called him. He's still very quiet, and is also likely homosexual, but seems to be much more comfortable with himself, perhaps on account of his loving mother. However meek he may come across, he does not apologize for his personality, and is in fact very cunning and comfortable with violence, as shown when he dissects one rabbit and snaps the neck of another. During the scene immediately following, where Phil finishes the rope, Peter gains power over Phil for the first time in the film with the knowledge of Phil's mentor, Bronco Henry's secret, that he and Phil had a relationship. From that point on in the scene, the power balance is neutral. It's an almost conflicting message when it comes to the end. On one hand, Phil was able to open up, but he did so to the wrong person, and it ended up getting him killed. As we as a society are more willing to discuss topics such as masculinity and sexuality, it's fascinating to look back in history and see how previous generations addressed or failed to address such concepts. From the stone-faced masculinity that defined early westerns to the explosive tempers and real vulnerability of recent times, I'm immensely excited to see where this topic will go in future westerns.